So our next section here is factoring and the quadratic equation. So I'm going to take a look at this first problem here, and what you always want to do is first get it in the form of the quadratic equation, which is 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 9x and the 2 over, and so I'm going to say 3x squared minus 9x plus 2 is equal to 0. So now it's in that correct form, with 3 being my a, 9 being my b value, and 2 being my c value. Now, I could go ahead and try and factor this, but I already know that this one is not factorable. So what you can always use, even if it is factorable, is you can always use the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in this case, I'm going to have that x equals positive 9 here, negative 9. So that becomes a positive, plus or minus the square root of negative 9 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2 all over 2 times that a value there, which is 3. I'm going to go ahead and simplify what's under the radical. And so what we get is positive 9 plus or minus the square root of 57 all over 6. And you could really leave this like this, but I'm going to go ahead and split this into 2 to get my 2 actual decimal answers. So I'm going to have x equals 9 plus the square root of 57 over 6, and x equals 9 minus the square root of 57 over 6. And so the 2 answers that I'm going to get here are 2.76 and x equals 0.24. Moving on to this next one here, once again, I'm going to get it into that ax squared plus bx plus c form. So 5x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Okay, I can identify my a, my b, and my c yet again, and so I take that quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, and I can go ahead and plug in those values. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 6 all over 2 times 5. Once again, simplifying the top here, I get that x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 136 all over 10. And if I split that into 2, I find that x is negative 4 plus the square root of 136 over 10, which gives me an answer of 0.77. And if I do x equals negative 4 minus the square root of 136 all over 10, I get an answer here of negative 1.57. So I'm going to start off this one the same way I did the other ones, get it in that form, 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So in this case, 0 equals x squared minus 4x minus 5. And I could use the quadratic formula once again, but this one actually is factorable, so I'm going to solve it that way. We know that our first 2 terms are going to be x and x in both, and then in order to get that minus 5, we need a 5 and a 1, and since we want the middle term to be minus 4, it's going to be x minus 5 and x plus 1, because they multiply together to get negative 5, and they add together to get negative 4. And now I can go ahead and solve this. And similar to what we did with the quadratic formula, we're going to split this into two. Okay, this is known as a zero product property. When you have two things here multiplied together to get 0, one must be equal to 0. So we're going to try each one. So we can say 0 must be equal to x minus 5. That would give us an answer of 0. Or 0 must be equal to x plus 1. So we solve each of those equations and find that x equals 5 or x equals negative 1. Last one here, we see that everything's over on one side, but yet again we want to make sure that it's in that ax squared plus bx plus c order. So I'm going to say 0 equals negative 3x squared plus 4x plus 11. You technically do not have to do that, but I think it helps prevent mistakes in identifying a, b, and c. So now that we have them identified, we're going back to our quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, and I fill in the numbers that I know, so we're going to have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times positive 11 all over 2 times negative 3. I can simplify that top, and I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 148 all over negative 6. Splitting that up, I get x equals negative 4 plus the square root of 148 divided by negative 6. So that gives me an answer of x equals 2.69. The other possible answer is going to be x equals negative 4 minus the square root of 148 all over negative 6. And so I get an answer there of x equals negative 1.36.